Hello everyone, and welcome to the 5th video in my What I'm Sowing from Seed Today series. My name is Jenna and I am gardening in Midwestern Ohio, Zone 6A, with a last spring frost date of approximately May 10th. Today, March 29th, I'm just shy of 6 weeks from my last spring frost date. Now, as I mentioned in prior videos, my schedule for indoor sown items stays pretty much the same from year to year. But the Ohio spring weather always keeps us on our toes, so take my schedule for direct sowing outdoors as a recommendation rather than a rule. A couple of weeks ago, we were in the 70s. This past week, we had snow and lows in the 20s. Now, as of today, it looks like we're going to get another decently warm stretch. So I am out planting again in full force. And while I know the title of the video is what I'm sowing today specifically, this video actually encompasses what I am sowing and planting over the next week or so. So let's jump in. As we near the end of March, I continue to direct sow quite a few items that I mentioned in prior videos. This includes things like carrots, lettuce and other leafy greens such as chard, mustard, arugula, and collards, as well as peas, potatoes, radishes, and salad turnips. I'm also beginning to transplant a few things. First up are my onions. Well, I actually planted the first round of onion transplants on the 18th, but I'm planting another batch today. These are my onion transplants from Dixondale Farms. I completely forgot to start my own bulbing onions from seed this year, though I do have a small batch of bunching onions hardening off in the greenhouse right now that I will also be planting out. These starts are very cold hardy. Most of the general planting advice I've seen says to plant these out 4 to 6 weeks before your last frost date, but I have good results going even earlier, up to 8 to 9 weeks before my last frost date. In general, the biggest risk to planting this early is that the soil becomes oversaturated with too much spring rain and the onions rot in the cold, wet soil. So my concern is more for making sure the soil is not waterlogged rather than what my nighttime lows are this time of year. Most onions are hardy down to 20 degrees Fahrenheit, but if you're experiencing sustained temperatures below 25, I definitely recommend covering them with frost cloth or other protection. Covering them with frost cloth can also help them get more of a head start when the spring temperatures are still quite variable this time of year. One issue I do have with onion seedlings is birds trying to pull the freshly planted transplants out of the ground. I have no idea why they do this, and they don't ever hurt the plants. I just find them laying just a few inches from where I planted them. But to dissuade them from doing this, I find that sticking cheap reflective pinwheels near my plantings seems to help. I'm also planting my starts of cold hardy leafy greens, including lettuce, spinach, kale, and collards. I started a batch of these back in mid-February indoors, and quite a few of these are ready to transplant. I've had these out in my small greenhouse for the last 2 weeks, which is for the most part unheated, but I have run a small space heater a few nights just to keep it above freezing in here. This is part of my rather extended hardening off process this time of year. I usually try to do at least 2 weeks in the greenhouse and then at least 3 days or more with my flats sitting out in the garden in full exposure. So I'll usually put them like up in a raised bed or something, but in an area where they're going to get more wind exposure and sun exposure. Weather dependent, once I get these in the ground, I'll sometimes use either frost cloth or shade cloth, sometimes both. But since we're due for a stretch of cool, overcast, rainy weather, these transplants should be fine with no extra protection for now. Very soon, I'll also start transplanting out my brassicas, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, and kohlrabi. Again, weather dependent, but I usually shoot for early April. Now today, I'm also direct sowing more items in the garden. First up are my beets. I generally aim for sowing beets anytime from the beginning of April till about the 3rd week in April for a summer harvest. I will plant again in late summer for a fall harvest. Most beet varieties are multi-germ, so you will get 2 to 3 embryos per seed ball, and these do require thinning for proper root formation. That is, unless you get a monogerm variety such as Monita. Side note, chard is also a multi-germ seed ball. Beets can technically be transplanted if you're careful, but I have always had better results direct sowing. That being said, if you want to get a jump start on germination, I find that pre-germinating the seed prior to direct sowing it really helps with this. I also saw a video where the gentleman gardener started his beets in little tiny soil blocks, and as soon as those seeds had sprouted and put on little tiny leaves, he transplanted the whole block out into the garden. For the life of me, I cannot find this video again anywhere, so if anyone has seen this one or something similar to it, please link it in the comments below so that other folks can view it. I've not had a chance to try this technique out yet. I'm still trying to figure out a way to rig up a small soil blocker, but I think in theory that this should work really, really well. The idea being that you're transplanting before the taproot formation begins, so you shouldn't really have any issues with root malformation. Today, I am also direct sowing calendula. Now, I mentioned in a February video that I sometimes start an early batch of calendula indoors, but now is the time to start direct sowing it. I love calendula because if you plant it once, you will generally have volunteers through the garden every year. It readily self-sows, and an easy way to tell the appropriate time for direct sowing is simply watching for seedlings to pop up on their own. I've mentioned my love for this super tough little flowering herb in multiple videos, but this is such a useful plant for both humans and insects alike. And despite those beautiful sunny blooms, I've seen this plant handle temperatures down into the 20s with ease. Dill is another plant where I started an early batch indoors, but now I am ready to start direct sowing. I generally direct sow dill anywhere from the end of March to the middle of April, dependent on the weather. Dill is a cool weather lover and will tend to bolt when the weather gets warm. That's great if you're collecting seeds or growing for beneficial insects who love the blooms. But if you want to get an extended harvest of just the ferny fronds, look for a slow to bolt variety, like Delight, Thalia, or Hera. Right now I'm also sowing Nigella, also known as Love in a Mist. Super easy to grow. This is another one that I look for volunteers as an indicator for when to plant. Be aware though that these will often sprout up at the first blush of spring-like weather, but then will get frosted back by extremely low temperatures. I had seedlings popping up in early February, so I generally wait until the second or third flush of seedlings as my indicator for when to direct sow my seeds. This is a great one to collect your own seed from. I simply harvest the whole seed head and keep them in glass jars. When I'm ready to plant, I just crush the seed head over the planting area and all those tiny seeds just broadcast sow. It's a ready self-seeder too, so generally if you plant once, you'll have lots of volunteers every spring. It is a short-lived bloomer, but those blooms are very pretty and they're also edible. I'm only starting a few things from seed indoors today. First up is my toothache plant. This is also known as buzz buttons, electric daisies, or electric buttons. This is one of my favorite herbs to grow because this is such a fun plant to introduce to people. It's named for its unusual ability to temporarily numb or cause the mouth to tingle once it's chewed. Historically, this herb has been used for its anesthetic effect and antiseptic properties. But in recent years, it's gotten a lot of press because bartenders have started using it in trendy cocktails, with the idea being that it changes the drink experience because you chew the buzz button and then it alters your perception of what the cocktail tastes and feels like as you're drinking it. It is a really interesting herb to grow and quite unique looking in the garden as well. I'm also starting my Strawflowers. You'll sometimes see these referred to as everlastings because once the flowers are mature, they do dry up and last forever. This is a really easy to grow annual flower, and while it can technically be direct sown, I tend to have better results starting indoors and then transplanting. Another flower I'm starting today are 4 o'clocks. Now this is actually the first year that I have grown these from seed, with a big thanks to Brian's Garden for sharing his seed with me. These will grow as a perennial in warmer zones, but here in Ohio, I'm growing them as an annual. I've soaked the seed overnight to help speed germination, but otherwise Brian assures me that these are quite easy to grow. I can't wait to see them in bloom. I'm starting the perennial herb Boneset today also. Boneset is native to the eastern US and Canada, and this flowering perennial herb is a lovely plant, attractive to pollinators, and can be used to treat cold and flu. In fact, according to Fruition Seeds, in the 1918 flu pandemic, the US government subsidized boneset tincture, so everyone had access to this incredible immune-boosting medicine. I don't know about you and your family, but my kids were sick so much this winter. I'm really eager to grow this herb and try out making the tincture for myself. Now, I'm only starting one veggie from seed indoors. Well, I guess to be botanically correct, fruit indoors this week, but it's a biggie. I'm sowing my tomatoes. Now, I generally aim for starting all of my tomatoes on April 1st. I've played around with earlier timings, but since I don't transplant tomatoes out into the garden any earlier than May 15th, I find that the April 1st start date works really well. Since they grow like weeds, if I start them earlier, they're usually just getting too big for me to handle. I typically just start my tomatoes in 50-cell trays and up-pot them about 2 or 3 weeks before transplant time, burying a large portion of stem to encourage more root growth. This year, I'm testing out a couple of different planting methods in hopes of avoiding that whole repotting phase. I'm going to try planting in extra deep cells, planting low, and then filling in along the stem as the tomato seedlings grow. I'm also trying out the double cup method. A big thanks to fellow Ohio gardener Lou for sending me this really clever tray specifically for holding these cups. I hadn't used this method before because I never had the space on my seed starting rack for it, but now I've just given in and am sacrificing my kitchen table to seed starting, so I can easily fit this tomato tray here. I'd also love to hear your favorite method for starting tomato seeds. Drop a line in the comments below and let me know. Well, that wraps up what I am sowing today. If you'd like to follow along with my sowing schedule for the rest of the season, be sure to subscribe to my channel, Growfully with Jenna. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.